I graduated nursing school in 2012, and it wasn't until 2016, almost 2017, that I found out that nurses in New York City were actually not paid as well as I thought they were. And that didn't happen until I had a friend who was working with me. He was also a nurse. We were both working at this hospital, which was supposed to be, and still is, considered the #1 hospital in New York City, New York Presbyterian. This friend started working on the same day that I started working there. And we became really good friends because of that. And 1 year into our employment in that institution, he suddenly vanished. He never told anyone in the department that he was going anywhere. And I ended up giving him a call and asked him what happened to him. He said that he forgot to tell me, but he had moved to California. And at that point, I was confused because I remember him mentioning that he was going to move to California, but I never heard any inkling whatsoever that he was actually going to do it. Apparently, he had already been living in California for about 2 or 3 months at that time. And I asked him if it was really as good as people were making it out to be, because while we were both working at New York Presbyterian, I remember him mentioning one time how one of his friends was working in California, was making well over $200,000 a year as a registered nurse, a staff nurse, not a travel nurse. He told me that it was true and asked if we wanted to go and visit him. So Monica, my wife, who's also a nurse, we graduated about a year apart from each other. Actually, almost like 6 months to a year apart from each other. I told Monica about this, and she didn't question it. She didn't even think twice about traveling to California to see what all the fuss was about. But the first place we decided to visit was in 2016, and it was San Diego, because we were under the impression that if nurses in Northern California were making a lot of money, then I guess that applied to the rest of California too, because we thought that all of California was expensive. So we went to San Diego, and well, I'll say this. There's some things that we did like about it, some things that we didn't like about it. So the things that we didn't like about it, coming from New York, which was such a green state full of lots of vegetation, actually even from the southern tip of the East Coast to the northern tip of the East Coast, all you see is greenery. To then flying out to San Diego and seeing nothing but dirt and some palm trees, it felt like we had stumbled into a desert. Another thing that we didn't like about it was that the homes didn't seem to be as creative architecturally as a lot of the homes that we saw on the East Coast. It almost felt like many of the homes in San Diego were just replicas of one another. And there were also a lot of smaller homes, which really surprised me because I thought California was supposed to have some of the biggest homes. That's how we realized that when we started looking on Zillow, that the reason why they're small is because if you try to buy a larger home, you're going to spend well over $1 million to get that home. And that's in San Diego. And then we started looking at the salaries in San Diego, and we thought we were misled. So I reached out to my friend and I asked him why the salaries were so low in Southern California. He said, well, the salaries are high in Northern California. I don't know about Southern California, so maybe you should just come up here and visit us instead. We did. We then took another trip. First trip was between November and December of 2016. That was to San Diego. The second trip was in January to February of 2017. When we came that second time to California, mind you, this is the second time we've ever been to California, we decided to go to San Francisco. And when we got to San Francisco, we were actually amazed by the architecture. We thought it was very beautiful, seeing all these Victorian homes. It really surprised us. And looking at the landscape, the Golden Gate Bridge is as beautiful as they say it is, if not more, honestly, because the pictures don't do it justice. This bridge is massive. The architecture is beautiful. It's something you're not used to seeing anywhere else in the country. And I thought San Francisco was going to be the place, until we started looking at the home prices. And the weather is another thing, okay? So the weather, it's not as warm as I thought it was going to be. I thought San Francisco was going to be like San Diego and the rest of California where it's warm, but it's not. The majority of the year, San Francisco is relatively cool, anywhere from like 50 to 70 degrees. And only a few times of the year will you get temperatures that are in the 80s and 90s. Yeah, we fell in love with the architecture, and then we saw how much the homes cost in that area. And that's the area where when you hear about how expensive California is on the news, you have to think about a place like San Francisco, because that's basically the pinnacle how expensive real estate is in California. And not all of California is like that. And I didn't learn that until we went to go and visit my friend on that very same trip. Mind you, we still were convinced at this point, actually, that we were going to move to California because all these things that my friend had told me. So while this was happening, I ended up receiving a few phone calls for interviews. The first phone call had to happen after our trip was supposed to end. So I had to extend my trip. And Monica, my daughter, and my mother, who came with us at the time, they were going to go back home before my interview was scheduled to take place. But we all got a chance to go and visit my friend in Roseville. We ended up driving about 2 hours because there was a lot of traffic. It usually takes about an hour and a half, an hour, 45 minutes to get there. And as I'm pulling up to this neighborhood, I'm thinking that we're going to be pulling up to an apartment complex. I was thinking he was renting with his wife, who's also a nurse, and his 3 kids. But all I see is a neighborhood littered with homes, newly constructed homes. And I thought maybe he was just renting a home in this neighborhood. You know, there's no way he can afford to buy a home if he had just moved to California 8 months prior to me finding out about it. So we pull up to the street that his address is located in. It's a home directly in front of where we parked, the address he had given us. And we get out of the car, we knock on the door. He opens the door with his wife and his kids. And we ask him if he's renting that house. And again, you know, being the secretive person that he is, he tells us that he forgot to tell us he had purchased this home a few months prior. And we were so puzzled at this point because we were under the impression that buying a home in California was unattainable for a nurse. It was impossible. So we went into his house, and as soon as he started talking, all these lights went up in my head. I could not believe what he was telling me. The hospital that he was working in has nurse-to-patient ratios. That's something that we never knew existed, being that we were working in New York City where there are no nurse-to-patient ratios set by law, right? So he said in California, there is a state law that prohibits facilities from assigning, and this is acute care facilities, okay? Because you can be working for a long-term care facility and these laws do not apply to you. But if you work for an acute care facility, then your employer is bound by these laws where they're required not to assign more than a certain number of patients. And being that we were working in the ER, he told me that as an ER nurse, you cannot get more than 4 patients. And if in the ER you have a critically ill patient, it becomes a 1-to-1, specifically in the hospital that we were working in or that he was working in at the time. And I eventually ended up getting a job in. But if you end up having a critically ill patient, it's a 1-to-1. If that patient becomes a candidate for ICU, they can give you another stable ICU or a stable step-down patient or a stable tele patient. And if you have a patient that has to be restrained, that becomes a 1-to-1 in that department that he was working in the ER and in that specific institution. If you have a patient that is a step-down candidate, then your ratio is a 3-to-1. So you have 3 patients to 1 nurse. And if you have tele patients, then it's a 4-to-1 ratio. So you have 4 patients that are tele to 1 nurse. And then if they're all med-surg patients, it's still 4-to-1. And that's the case for all ER patients. If you're working as a tele nurse, it's 4-to-1. The step-down nurse is 3-to-1. As an ICU nurse, the maximum they can give you is 2 patients. When he was telling me this, you know, this was more than enough to convince me to move to California. But then he started talking about his pay. And he told me, I think this was at the time, he was making about, I think like $82, $83 an hour, if I'm not mistaken. It was probably more than that, but the base rate was somewhere around that. He's a night shift nurse. Again, he's a staff nurse, right? He's not a per diem nurse. And this was back in 2017. It is currently 2025. And every year since then, these nurses are getting anywhere between 4% raise to 6% raise per year. So just imagine what it is right now, okay? I'll talk about that later. But he was telling me about the ratios. He was telling me about the pay. And then he started telling me about the benefits. He told me that as a nurse here in California, or any employee in California, if you work more than 8 hours in one day, you get paid time and a half. That's if you're an 8-hour shift employee, because if you're a 12-hour shift employee or a 10-hour shift employee, you don't benefit from that. But if you are a 12-hour shift employee or 8-hour shift employee, and you work more than 12 hours between the 12th hour and the 16th hour, then you get paid double time. So not only can you make time and a half between the 8th and the 12th hour, but you could also make double time between the 12th and the 16th hour. This does not exist in any other state. In addition to that, if you work in this particular hospital and you work 7 days in a row, on that 7th day, you will get paid double time for the entirety of your shift. Not only that, if you work, let's say 6 days in a row, on the 6th day, you get paid time and a half for the entirety of your shift. The 7th day is double time. Any consecutive day after that, you get paid time and a half until you reach the 7th day again, and you get paid double time until you stop working. And that just blew my mind. I couldn't believe a hospital could have benefits like that for a nurse. And then he told me the reason why it's that good is because the nurses union in this part of California and for this particular hospital system is the best in the country. And I totally believed it. There is no other nurses union that has benefits like this. And every other nurses union tries to model their contract to this particular nurses union. And then he drove us around the neighborhood. And that's when I was 100% convinced we needed to move. Right then and there, Monica, we need to pack. No question about it. We were going to move. And we started looking at the neighborhoods. We started looking at homes. We saw places that were for rent, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, for $1,500. This was back in 2017. It's much more expensive now. We were living in an 800 square foot apartment in New York City as a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, and we were paying about $2,500 at the time. But we were seeing 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartments for 2/3 of the price of what we were paying for in New York City. And then we started looking at homes on Zillow, and we saw there were homes for sale that were, let's say, 2,000, 3,000 square feet, and they were $450,000. $550,000, $650,000. It was unbelievable to me. My friend had purchased this home. This was a 4,000 square foot home that he purchased in 2016 for $650,000. I could not believe that was possible in California. And these prices have gone up because a lot of people across the state of California and across the country have realized this is the location that nurses need to come to in order to make twice as much, if not 3 times as much, as what they're making in their home state. And in addition to that, a place where the cost of living is so low relative to their income. So we visited him, we saw some homes, he told us all these benefits, and then Monica ended up going back to New York City. I ended up going for my job interview. I got a job offer before I even left California. I didn't accept it. I ended up going back to New York City. Got another job interview while I was in New York City within a week or two. That job was at Sutter Roseville. I ended up accepting it because my friend told me, you might as well just accept this job because it's a decent wage. I was going to be making $65 an hour, which was not bad. I was making $50 an hour in New York. And again, remember, the cost of living is lower than it is in New York. So I accepted the job offer. And a few months later, we were already living in California. Now I'm working for this hospital that he works in. It's called Kaiser Permanente. And it took me 8 months of applying for this job before I ended up getting it. And Monica, when we moved, she had no job lined up. So I ended up applying for work for her for 3 months straight before she ended up getting a job. And thankfully, after 300 applications and 5 job interviews, the one job that she ended up accepting after she had already accepted another job and she was in orientation at that other job with Dignity Health was Kaiser Permanente. So now her and I are both working at Kaiser Permanente. I am making $109 per hour. We are completely debt-free. We ended up buying a house. That's the only thing we have debt in. Monica, on the other hand, makes $142 an hour. She's a per diem nurse now. And we're just living life. We're loving life. However, I did mention before, we plan to move back to New York because while we were here during the pandemic, we ended up having a baby. So now our son is 4 years old. Our daughter is in college. She's 19 now. And we want to move back to New York City. Every time we come back from New York City to California, it makes us feel homesick. Our son cries every time we leave New York City, and we just want to be closer to family. And thankfully, we've been able to pay off all of our student loan debt, credit card debt, auto loans, everything. So when we move back to New York, we're going to be selling our house. And the plan is to sell it in 2026. But if we can't sell it for a decent price, because you know how the housing market is these days, it's not a seller's market by any means. So if we can't sell our house before our son is supposed to start school in August or September of 2026, we're probably going to stay in California for a little bit longer until we can sell our house for a decent price. Anyway, I just wanted to tell you guys our story about why we ended up moving to California, why this one friend that I had was the reason that we ended up moving here in the first place, and why I think everyone who works outside of California should do the same thing that we did. And maybe it doesn't have to be California. maybe you can look at other states. And that's why I decided to build this app that we have called Map My Pay. In the app, you're able to look at over 1,000 cities and find out which city makes the most sense to move to when you consider and you factor in the pay and the cost of living. All right, if you guys want me to make a video on a specific topic, please let me know. I'm here at work now, so I'll talk to you guys on the next one.